Welcome to Productized podcast, the show where we dive deep into the world of product management with industry leaders. My name is Pedro Ganço, and I will be your host today. We have a very special guest with us today, Ken Sandy. Ken is a seasoned product management leader with over 2 decades of experience in the consumer, enterprise, and mostly education technology sectors. He is the author of the influential Product Manager, How to Lead and Launch Successful Technology Products. I think it's a must read for anyone looking to excel in product management, and Ken is also a notable track on the edtech space, being a key contributor in projects we all know like masterclass.com and LinkedIn Learning, formerly known as lynda.com. Ken also teaches product management at UC Berkeley, where his course is renowned for its practical, hands-on approach to preparing the next generation of product leaders. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm also very, very excited to have you on the show. You have a very, very interesting career path in all this teaching space. But before we dive in this conversation, here at Productized, we usually kick off some light questions. And I have a couple for you. So what's your favorite app or tech product right now?
Oh, okay. Well, look, I have a very curious mind, and I love technology, and I love to figure out how things work. And I must admit, I have had a bit of a habit of getting into kind of bleeding edge products and technologies, things that don't quite work yet. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to answer this question maybe a little bit differently in that I was in a very fortunate position. I've recently purchased a house, and I have been having a lot of fun and a lot of frustration with trying to figure out how to automate a lot of my life in the house. So everything from air conditioners to televisions to lighting to just getting anything to sort of like talk to each other. And what I've discovered is that there's a lot of really complex solutions out there that can do some pretty amazing things in terms of automating the little things in your life, but nothing talks to each other, and none of the user interfaces are easy to use. Even with the big guys, you think about Amazon, Alexa, Google Home, etc. It still is just so complicated to set up and so complicated to get working. So we've got a long way to come, but it has been a lot of fun geeking out on trying to figure out how things work. And I think that probably tells you a lot about me and how a lot of my career has operated. I kind of have a curious mind. I kind of want to figure out what makes things tick.
Amazing. And I feel the pain of the domotic synchronization between different devices. I feel a lot this pain. I'm really, really curious. And the second icebreaker question I have for you is what's the most unusual or interesting thing about you that people cannot find online?
Well, they may not be able to find easily online, but I am a very big, avid backpacker. So I love adventure. I love adventure travel. I love traveling kind of what people might call on the cheap, but really it's about getting down local and really experiencing things on the ground. So I've traveled to about 75 countries. And the longest time I was away was 7 months. On average, I'll take off for 3 months. And this is usually in between jobs or in between, a career break or so forth. I have really enjoyed traveling the world in a way to meet the locals and, figuring out how to get A to B when only a bus is there or getting off the beaten track, so to speak. Of course, everyone likes a nice hotel every now and then, but I really am an avid, I would say, adventure or culture traveler. Yeah, and I don't mind traveling by myself because when you're on the road, you get to meet people. I think at one point, I spent almost 2 weeks without speaking English to anybody before I finally ran into somebody else who spoke English. And we instantly bonded, of course, because you've got that kind of common adventure. So something interesting about me is that I love that kind of adventure travel. I've done some really amazing, I've been very privileged to do some pretty amazing things and to be to some pretty amazing places.
Well, what's your next place you have in mind to visit?
Well, actually, I'm off to New Zealand. I've only ever been there for work purposes briefly before. So I'm actually going to New Zealand in a couple of weeks, and I'm looking very much forward to exploring the South Island and seeing the glaciers and going on the rivers and things like that. I've done bungee jumping before. I'm probably not going to do it this time around. Maybe I'm a little bit more brittle at this point of my life, but that'll be my next trip.
I can confirm I did some stalking and I did not find that online. Also know people, we also have that in common. I really appreciate backpacking kind of travel.
Excellent. Well, you may find some things online if you actually type in my name and a WordPress blog. I've got a couple
Mhm.
of blogs that I did while I was traveling because it was kind of fun to take pictures as you go and
Do you
and
want to
blog.
share the world or not today?
But that's okay. Just look for kensandy.wordpress.com. You'll find some stuff.
Okay, super cool. Okay, maybe we can then dive in a little bit on the topic of your journey. You have a
Yeah.
fascinating career, and maybe we can start by sharing with our audience a bit about your journey into product management. What was it like transitioning from the traditional consulting world at McKinsey, where it all started
Mhm.
at the time? Because it was very, very, very new, the product management role. So how was it, that transitioning back then?
Right. Well, first of all, I have an engineering degree, and so I loved building things. I've sort of loved tinkering, as I was talking about before. So I love execution. I love getting my hands on things and trying to make things work. What McKinsey gave me was a marvelous introduction to the world of strategy, business acumen,
Hmm.
analytics. And it really opened my eyes to the power of like just thinking strategically and really understanding why the intellectual curiosity of finding out answers to big problems and just getting in and sort of analyzing and trying to frame questions and tell stories. And so I really enjoyed both those things. And I found at
Hmm.
my time at McKinsey, I was there for a little over 3 years. Uh, by the time I was wrapping up there, I was actually missing the execution component. And so, with this great love of strategy, business, thinking through really difficult problems that McKinsey gave me, and you'd sort of do your project, that it was a fantastic experience. I will tell you, it was an amazing, it was like NBA, like live, condensed. You really are put through your paces. Great experience, learned a lot, but I don't get to execute. And so, when an opportunity came up with one of the a couple of people I'd worked with at McKinsey, they founded a company, a startup. Back in those days, it feels very quaint now, but it was a startup company. They gave me a call, said, would I like to try my hand at joining them? And this was basically and the role that they described was called business analyst. And I'm like, okay, well, it sounds interesting, but I really do want to get into the execution. I want to work with engineers. I want to work with designers. I want to work with like the business people. I did not know the word to use. I did not know the name of that role. I could not identify that role. I knew what it kind of was, but I couldn't name it. And I joined this company just going feet first as I often just do. And I again had a marvelous like 4 or 5 years with that company. And that was also an opportunity. This was in Melbourne, Australia. And at that point, I moved to the US in San Francisco. And I just discovered the world of product management and frankly made it up as we went. Eventually realizing that was that was the actual name of the role, and kind of never really looked back at that point. I was fortunate enough to discover something I really, really love. So the transition part of that story is spending time at college executing, building things, learning computer science was great. Loved it. Getting into the strategy and the business and that high level thinking, problem solving,
Hmm.
loved it. But it wasn't until I put those two things together that I really thrived. And finding this role, this product management role, fairly early in my career, I'm very fortunate to have found it. And I get even today that taste of not only do you get to think of big, bold problems and, blank slate, but you get into the nitty gritty of how does this thing actually work?
It's amazing. You didn't need to give up any of the strategy because you still need to do a lot of strategy, but still get the chance to put your hands on the execution and see things shining in the end.
That is correct. But it's also very humbling because you can be a great strategic thinker, but you don't really test your ideas until it's executed. And so you can be thinking all day about how smart you are at solving problems. It's not really until they're tested in the market with your teams, you actually see the code working, you try the product out yourself and you scratch your head saying, what am I doing? You get humbled. And so that is an aspect. I think most of your listeners need to understand that being strategic is an important part of the role. And it's great when you get that opportunity to be strategic in your everyday product management role. But really, it comes down to driving outcomes, executing and driving outcomes. And that's why so many of our product managers are often very frustrated saying, I want to spend more time strategizing and thinking. But really, at the end of the day, like a lot of it is coming down to we're building something that's valuable. Is it working? Are we driving results? Exactly.
That's an amazing observation. Do you think it would change anything now if you had to go back in time, back to the consulting at McKinsey, where mostly it's in the strategy? Now that you know the value is in the delivery, actually delivering value, and
that thank you for clarifying, because the value isn't in the delivery. The value is in delivering
the valuable,
right? Solving a real problem, and that's the crux of what I would do differently. Is all of this, I do strategy all day these days with my clients, and at the end, it's always coming back to some very simple but very hard to answer questions, which is what is going to be the most valuable problems to solve, meaningful problems to solve for the customers? How do we know that? How do we learn and test into knowing that? And so, strategy is fun, but really, it really is coming down to some fundamentals of are we building something that's valuable for our customers, and will we be able to build a viable business around that? By the way, that latter aspect, I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but that is one of the biggest gaps I see in a lot of product managers is that business acumen of like, how will we actually commercialize this, and how do we really know that we can build a successful business around that?
Yeah, maybe we'll focus on it a little bit later on those common things you see. For now, maybe I would like to dive now a bit into the main topic of your book, The Influential Product Manager, and start with a quote of the book that says, in order to be successful, product managers must rely on the success of others. They have no direct authority, only influence. End quote. So your book emphasizes a lot this relationship that product managers have of being an influencer, not only a manipulator or authoritarian figure. Can you unpack a little bit on this topic and see how we need to influence in cross-functional teams?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very broad topic, so I'm going to pick out some nuggets here of maybe a little bit of what triggered me to write the book and a little bit of like in some response to, this notion of working through others. So first of all, I spent a lot of my career as we were building out, product management. I mean, I definitely had my fair share of acting, probably a little bit too directly, a little bit too autonomously, a little bit too like sure of myself. The thing that I heard a lot of, particularly mid-career, is all accountability, no authority. Product managers of all accountability and no authority. And I could just remember thinking to myself, who would take that job? Who in their right mind would take that job? Why would you say, I'm going to be accountable to everything, but I have no authority over it? So this term influence really started bubbling around product management as a role. And I just found it a convenient term. I liked the term, but it was awfully convenient. You have to work through influence. And I didn't know what that really meant, let alone a lot of the team members that I was hiring, some people that I was mentoring. Like, what do we really mean by that? So what motivated me to write the book was to try to decode what that really meant in your everyday. So when you're faced with how you're operating with senior stakeholders, what does that really mean? Your behaviors, how do you engage them? What are some of the things that you need to understand about them, empathize with them? All the way through to what kind of metrics should I be choosing for my products that will be the most influential on my business, not just revenue and things that people want me to measure, but what gets at the crux of the problems I need to be solving for my customers and what's going to measure success there so I can get attention, people to really pay attention to those influential metrics and everything in between, the whole product lifecycle. So that's what I wrote. First chapter was just a lot of the introduction, but really it starts with your mindsets. How are you going to approach your role? How do you view yourself and your role and your strengths and weaknesses, and having self-awareness there. Stakeholder management, common theme all the way through. How do I engage not just senior stakeholders, but how do I think about stakeholders? In fact, in one part of the book, I even talk about my experience a little bit about realizing that one of the wonderful people on the front desk who was greeting people every day could be incredibly influential in helping me keep my team happy and motivating, because she was just one of those wonderful, bubbly people who would do anything. So keeping her engaged and knowing what my goals were was just an example of thinking of how to be influential in the organization. So it doesn't have to be senior execs, it can be anyone, your stakeholders. But then I go into basically the product lifecycle throughout the rest of the book and just picking out each stage, if you will, as I think about how do I conduct customer interviews? How do I think about writing what I want built, specifications? How do I engage design? How do I engage my engineering team? And importantly, how do I make trade-offs? I've really tried to make everything about influence. What's the role of influence through that entire life cycle? And so that's kind of maybe unpacking it a little bit. The key thing that I've learned, I'll give you a few real big, I think, lessons from or themes from influence. Number one is realizing that you don't actually have direct authority. I mean, you might have a great reputation, you might have authority in the organization, but if you want everybody, all the key people to line up behind you, and I'm talking about not just an engineering team to go build something, I'm talking about engineers, data analytics, managers of those people, or product marketing team, your sales team. Like when you think about that, you don't have authority. What do you do? You have influence. Well, surely the best way to operate is to operate as someone who understands the customer better than anyone else, who is on top of the data, who understands the facts, who can tell a really good story. Now, I don't mean a fairy tale. I mean is
proper
succinct.
narrative.
Yes, proper narrative. Probably not doing the best job of this right now myself, but concise and telling a good story. But yeah, we're having a conversation, so it's fine. But really being clear on your rationale, why you've drawn to some conclusions, what are the options that you've looked at, and bringing everyone along, being patient, like with everybody. I know you go back to the beginning of the story and go through the entire, how do we arrive at where we're at? And ideally letting them sort of process and come to the same conclusion themselves. That's an example of being influential. So far from spending a lot of time defining what I want to build and here's my specs and then throwing it over the wall, go build it, or going to a sales team and saying, okay, good, we've got this new product in market, go sell it. It's really about going all the way back to why are we even looking at this problem? Where did this come from? Why is this a priority? Why is this a priority now? And what is each of our roles in making this a success? And that requires, a certain level of patience. It is time consuming, but what's more time consuming is a failed product.
Exactly.
You can take your risk there if you wish. And it's also humbling because you will need to be very open to others. Ultimately, you're there when they're kind of taking ownership of the product, of the problem, of their role within like solving this problem for our customers. And that magic is quite hard to hit. Now, we don't have time for me to go through in all the little techniques you can use, but if you remember, I need to be on top of my data. I need to be on top of my rationale, and I need to bring others along. You're going to go a long way in being influential.
So it's kind of being influential, anyone in the company could be, but you feel like it's kind of mandatory for product managers, even this lack of authority.
That's
You
right.
need to
I'm actually
share
asked
with
that
the team.
question. I've actually asked that question a bit of like, well, what's so well, the positive one is, oh, your book, anyone should read this because everyone has to be influential these days. And I say yes. And then
But
the negative connotation I get sometimes is like, well, why would you write a book? Influence is just influence. Like, why is it so special? But bottom line, I found product management because of that lack of direct authority, and because you mentioned sort of manipulation before, like that just is desire, like being political or doing things just because the boss is saying that they need to be, it always leads to some bad outcome. So I find that product managers really are, if everyone else has influence as a key part of their role, we've turned it all the way up to 11. And everything we do, we have to think about how to operate by influencing others. And there's a fine line because you don't want to go over into manipulation. And manipulation is very simple. You're playing politics. You're manipulating when you're saying something a little bit different to another person because of who they are. You're either leaving facts out or you're emphasizing certain things that you think might be favorable to them. Okay. Or you're bad mouthing other teams, right? All of that is bad stuff. It always leads to trouble. So product managers just don't get away with it. Like it always catches up, I find. So
it's short-lived,
for us,
right? It's short-lived.
yeah, we've really got to operate, I think, with heightened awareness of the importance of influence in our roles.
Yeah, being a product manager myself, I do resonate with the three things you mentioned, like manipulation, authority, and influence. I feel that during career, one goes a little bit in all these three sometimes in their career. But like you said, it's short-lived. A product manager should really strive in influencing because it's a shared momentum with the teams. And yeah.
Yeah. And it is a fine line. I would quickly, it is a fine line. Like sometimes in an emergency, like the side's down, you have to take an authoritarian stance. Or if you can't shift a team to focus on the right thing because of some organizational dysfunction, you might have to take an authoritarian theme. You can choose to do that. You can't operate like that all the time, but you should sometimes operate with that in mind. Likewise, bringing people along sometimes means that you might be thinking a few steps ahead of them. You're not manipulating them, but you might be thinking, okay, I run into this all the time of like, if I just laid it all out right now about all the mistakes that they've gone and made, I'm not going to be very effective. But if I start kind of like building the relationship, being able to like introduce some of the key challenges that we're running into over time, I will be able to be very influential. I don't have to lay it all on the line. So I'm not saying don't be astute. And I am also saying don't sometimes operate sort of in the gray zone. Just know that, at its core, you can't do that long term. You have to focus on relationships, influence, and being true to, ultimately we're solving a customer's need, and that's what my purpose is, and that's why I exist. And I've got to operate with that primarily in mind, even though sometimes that's not the best thing for me personally.
That reply was so good that I think it even covered more than the question that I had ahead.
Sorry, I do that.
No, but that's very good. I like this conversation we're having. And for the benefit of aspiring product managers that may be listening to us, I really want to take advantage of you being this path of yours in the teaching space and all the career you had. So for aspiring product managers, how easy it is for anyone to become one, because it feels like a burden. Like you need to influence a lot of people, you need to know strategy, you need to know execution.
And quick break, did you know this year's Productized conference is a big one? We're celebrating our 10th edition. For a decade, we've been bringing product managers, designers, and innovators together in Lisbon for top-tier insights, interactive workshops, and invaluable networking. This year, it's bigger and better than ever with world-class speakers and special anniversary celebrations. Don't miss your chance to be part of it October 16th to 17th in Lisbon.
Join us for the big celebration. Tickets are now available at www.productized.co. We hope to meet you there.
Do you have any learning paths you wish you had known when it first started?
Starting out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so certainly back when I started, there was no formal training, and that's beginning to become a little bit more solved.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to maybe just take a quick sidebar on that too. Like at Berkeley, we started the product management class because we realized that this was actually something that we could train people. Let's say, bring the best out of the people who are, natural and aspiring product managers to become great product managers. There's lots and lots of online training now, and some of it's really good. I think nothing beats actually being able to show you can deliver results of some kind. And I get a lot of folks saying, well, I've never been a product manager before, and there's all these skills I've got to demonstrate. It seems easier, like, to be hired as a product manager, you already have to have been a product manager. And hey, yes, that's probably true, that once you're a product manager, it's going to be easy to get your second, third, and so forth role for sure. But I often find that if I dig deep enough in a lot of aspiring product managers' background, I can find the nuggets of experiences that are sort of the sum of the parts. So I can find examples of where they have made a difficult trade-off decision. I can help them find examples where they have had to influence a senior stakeholder. I can find examples where they've had to deliver something that required them to specify what it was, build requirements, go test it out, right? And work with others to actually deliver it. I can often find opportunities where they've gone and interviewed a market in some way, like customers in some way. Now, unless they're in a completely different realm, but even my students at Berkeley would always say, I have no product management experience. I can't even write my resume. And we would just take a little exercise. We go, don't think of like, I have to be a product manager and talk to that. Think about the 20 or so key skills. And by the way, I have those available on my website if you want to go deeper into the different skill sets. But they're the things you'd expect: delivery, being able to be analytic, some business acumen, technical, that kind of stuff. Almost always we were able to go through that list and surface examples of the aspiring product manager living that skill. And then we started putting them together as little stories, little examples that started to add up to show, yes, this is a product manager here. Yes, they haven't done everything, but there's 10 really amazing examples of the things you expect product managers to do in their background. So the first piece of advice is go back into your background and think about the skills that you need to demonstrate as a product manager. Tons of career ladders and skill development tools online, and I've got mine, right? So go and just use those, and you will find, I'm sure, that there are things that you can speak to about, times where you've done the things that we're expected to do, whether it be nonprofits, community work, a work experience, past job, adjacent job at a technology company. You'll be surprised what you can uncover. Now,
That's very
said,
insightful.
there'll be gaps. So one of the great things is if you have the list there, you don't have to be overwhelmed with it anymore. You're like, oh, I can see the 6 or 7 things I'm actually able to do and I think I'm really good at, but I can see my blind spots now. So you want to play to your strengths, go harder, really emphasize the strengths that you know that you have and the stories and examples you have, but quietly, carefully, slowly, just start filling in those gaps as the opportunity arises. You don't have to be overwhelmed by, oh, I've never written a strategy before. Okay, that's fine. Start with something smaller. Can you start tracking a metric for a key product that you like? Or can you volunteer in your current organization this is particularly for engineers, to offer to write the specifications for something you're going to go build and get that kind of like approved, if you will, or discussed with the product manager. Really, there's always opportunities you can take to put your hand up to start filling in those little gaps.
It is very insightful. And maybe they can even practice the narrative, because when they need to look back in their past, they need to tell, how can I tell a story? How can I look to what I've done before and glue into product management skills?
That's right. Hey, and it's very simple. I work with the folks I coach on this with a 5-point story framework. Pretty simple. Part of this comes from McKinsey, by the way. First is the situation. What situation did you face? What situation were you in? Complication or conflict or whatever it is you're running into. What made this a challenging situation? What was your resolution? How did you identify what you were doing to solve the problem? What were the outcomes of that? So go a step further and say, oh, I did this. What was the success that later led to? It can be very simple, like, oh, we, launched this thing and I was a part of that team and it actually drove retention up by 2%. Great. Get a number. Numbers are great. And then the fifth point to that story arc, which is often overlooked, is, and here's what I learned about it. Here's what I learned about myself. Here's a new thing I learned about that skill. Here's what I learned about if I was to face this problem again. And that is a really killer little, think of it a little like a resume practice or an interview practice. Get these little nuggets of 5-point stories, beautifully structured, quite succinct, and they're all touching on the really important things. And it finishes really strong because you're showing great self-awareness and that growth mindset.
Amazing. Your book mentions also the top 5 pitfalls to avoid. And now I wanted to steer into more of the challenges of this profession. And all it comes down mostly to mindset. So after so many years of you being a PM and teaching, coaching other PMs, what do you think is the most common behavior blocking PMs from evolving from good to great?
Right. Well, let's be real. There's a lot we can't control. I've never met a product manager who says that they've got too much time and not enough things to do. We exist in complicated organizational structures that aren't always empowering us. Yes, there might be some perfect models that we would like to imagine and have, but we do often have environments that are holding us back. So we are going to run into those environments. And sometimes those environments, and it has happened to me, mean that I can't even be successful. And you ideally recognize that fast enough and figure out a path out. So I'm not going to talk about those blockers or those challenges because they're external. They're not controllable. You can learn from them. You can avoid the mistake again in the future if you will. But there are just some things you can't control. And so one of the key things that goes with that is playing a long game in your product management career. And this is not specifically one of the 5 pitfalls, but I can get into those as well. But this is realizing that your career is going to go through ebbs and flows. You're going to most likely, not everybody, but most likely spend time, hopefully quality time, multiple companies, and those companies themselves will come and go. The roles will come and go. But the people that you meet along the way, the experiences you have, the customers you impact, they're there always. And so when you're faced with those sort of big organizational blockers and challenges, it's very easy to get extremely frustrated and even operate in an unproductive way with those. And I have lose sight of the long game, that actually what I'm here for is to bring my talents to the table to impact the lives of my customers, business, to grow a business, to be viable and sustainable, and to be a great team member, if you will, or better still, a member of my product management community. And so it is very easy to lose sight of that. So the first thing is always take a step back. And when you're super frustrated with the environment you're in, know that change happens consistently. You might feel completely blocked, very frustrated. You might even have a toxic manager. Like it will go.
It will happen.
It will happen. What can you do to have the right mindset in any of those situations so you can be your best self and to show up as best as you can? And it is really hard. I'm not pretending that, you can wake up, bounce out of bed every day. But the first thing to really think about is that you're there to, I've said this a lot, but you're there to solve customer problems, and empathizing and spending time with them and really trying your hardest to orient what you and your team are working around for them can overcome a lot of those challenges. Sorry, go on, Pedro.
Yeah, because I don't want to leave this out, because you also mentioned this in the book, and you just said it right now, which is in this order: you serve the users, then you serve the business, the company, then you serve the team, you serve yourself last, and you keep rephrasing it in that sentence, like you see this is the proper order, like focusing on to whom we're providing value, then the business.
And that's really difficult, right? That's a difficult thing. And I'm saying you should not be
self-conscious and working for your benefit,
making sure that your work, but ultimately you've got to, work for what's going to make you passionate and fulfilled. I've rarely found the situation where if I can go in that order in terms of how am I going to optimize, it's really more about when I'm making decisions, am I trying to put them in that order? What's right for the customer? What's right for this? There's a problem right there, because most companies want you to put the business before the customer. And there's a problem right there. So already there's friction. But if you could just go, okay, what is the right thing for the customer, and what is then the right thing for the business? And then what is the right thing for the team at large? And then what is right for myself? It's not just a nice Zen way of like being or anything like that. It actually is how you can be successful, because you will do good things for the customer. And even if you don't get the best end of the stick on that, because your business is not maybe functioning the way that you would ideally want, or you have a manager who's not recognizing you, the fact you've gone and driven impact and that you can speak to that will pay off in the future. And it will build your reputation. And so that it's not just that order of 4 is not just, hey, that's a nice way of living. It's actually kind of a secret to driving long-term
play the long
success.
game. The long game, you really need to get that order right. To whom you bring value, the customer, then the business, because it needs to survive, then the team, then yourself.
And it does lead to really difficult conversations, because sometimes you do need to say, I just don't believe that's the right thing for the customer, even though it might get us a little bump in revenue. Or I now have a difficult conversation to have with my team, because we're going to deprioritize something they really were looking forward to doing, that it's the right thing for the company, right? You can sort of see the order really puts you under pressure when you test it.
I've never seen anywhere else where we had that order, but once I read it, it makes total sense. Now looking back, it makes total sense. Do you think this could be helpful? Because my next question for you, it would be, how do you approach decision-making, which is such a very important topic for product managers, because there are always competing priorities and limited data.
Yeah.
So maybe this is the clue.
Let me start with a little kind of weird framework, and I'm famous for my weird little frameworks. Let's think about like a period of time that you need to drive some result, and you are making lots of little decisions along the way to try to get to that result. What is not optimal is waiting until you have as much information as possible to make any decision because your clock's running out. Say you've got 3 months to do something and you, in that period of time, make 3 decisions, you're probably not going to get there, even though you got the perfect amount of data. Now let's think all the way back to the other end of the scale, and you've got 3 months and you're making random decisions all the time based purely on intuition and gut feel because like you're feeling under pressure and you need to get this out by the end of the quarter, and you're not going to get there either because you're going to be all over the place. Okay. Somewhere in there is an optimal pace of decision making. I have sufficient data to make a decision right now, to keep moving and learn more so I can then make my next decision and my next decision, my next decision. So think about pace of decision making as a pretty important parameter of our roles that we overlook. We often think about decision making as making a hard, irreversible decision and rolling that out and things like that. And that's a decision we've made. And that's not what really we're doing. We're making lots of little micro decisions every single day. And it's key to keep making those decisions with the best data that you have available, while understanding that you could be wrong. And when you're wrong, what are the ways that we can move back, and being humble enough sometimes to say, frankly, I'm batting well if I'm getting 80% right. So there's a start. Okay, 1 out of 5 decisions maybe wasn't the best one. Can we walk it back? Can we adapt? Can we change it? So obviously, if there's some decisions you're making which are the irreversible, high impact decisions. So think of a little bit of a 2x2 matrix with impact and reversibility being kind of the matrices. You need more data for the high impact, irreversible decisions. Spend more time, kick the can down the road, make the decision as late as possible with the maximum amount of data. That makes sense. And a lot of the decisions we face every single day, really what's driving our hesitance is one of the cognitive biases I talk about, and that's reputation risk. We're worried about being wrong. We're worried about people seeing that we're wrong. So how do we get ourselves for the reversible decisions, we can always walk back. For the low impact ones, we've just got to make those quickly with whatever data is available. For the high impact reversible decisions, we need to probably figure out what's the smallest thing we can decide on now to learn more so I can start building up my point. Now, we talk about this all the time when we talk about MVPs and experimentation and testing, but really at its core, decision making is what we're talking about. Making decisions to learn more, to be able to make the next decision as quickly as possible, and knowing when the risk profile is such that we need to slow down, or when the risk is all in our head and we should just be speeding up.
So it's all about the tension between how much data do I really need before making a commitment. And that raises the need for getting all the hypotheses, what do I need to know and not to...
Well, you can't afford to wait for that. I'm actually, one of my personal struggles is I tend to be a little bit more on the perfectionist side. I've just learned some techniques of like, you know what? I'm going to do a first pass first, and I time box it. And I do that with a lot of my coaching team as well, because they're all perfectionists. I think it's one of the things that maybe product managers and perfectionists have a big Venn diagram overlap, right? But I really do need to push them to time box.
Be uncomfortable making some decisions.
Right? You could wait and wait and wait. You're not going to learn anymore. We need to move on. But take a first draft and then leave it open that I'm going to learn more and fill in a lot more, and a lot more of the details get out. So if you try to front load it, it's very, very dangerous because you get into this analysis paralysis or sort of definition where you're trying to like understand the whole universe before you can even move forward. And it's rare you really need to do that. It's not uncommon. It's not unheard of, but it's rare, particularly in our industry, that you need to know absolutely everything up front. But the reason why, what tends to be the clincher on a lot of this is to not make a decision is to make a decision to stay in the status quo right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I lay this out a lot with people in coaching. Let's actually write down the options we have. And they'll say, oh, one option is, well, you give me 10 more people in my team. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. But it's an option. And then another option is, oh, you give me absolutely nobody, right? And we deprioritize everything. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen either. And then it'll be like, there'll always be some hybrid options. And there's always the option which they overlook, which is status quo, stay in the current mode.
Which also
And
has a
I
cost.
find that to be very, very compelling, because when I lay that out to stakeholders, when they're facing a decision and they're not really inclined to make a decision, oh, I want to go meet with this and do that first, and everything.
That's a
They've
decision.
chosen status quo, and it's written at the top. That's option 0, status quo. Here's what's going to happen next week. Here's the consequence of that. Here's what's going to happen with the team. Here's the risk. Here's the revenue we're putting on the table or leaving on the table. And pretty quickly they start going, okay, let's look at option 1, 2, and 3 and start like actually getting to real conversations. So don't overlook status quo. It is a decision, and you are basically making the decision to turn up to work and deciding not to decide something that day.
Which has a cost, and you make it visible when you put it on number 1. That's a
100%.
very nice insight. In going a bit on the practical frameworks, because you've taught product management for so many years, are any specific frameworks or strategies you recommend PMs to use on their daily work?
Interesting. Yeah, I'll throw a couple out, and it's not going to be a complete list by a long shot. I'm going to start with an oldie but a goodie, particularly for older companies with more traditional product management, is starting to break the cycle of those big upfront PRDs, product requirement documentations or specification docs. And I much prefer a simple framework of just breaking down the problem. And in my book, I talk a little bit about this in 2 ways, but spending more time and writing down the answers to 5 questions. Who is the customer? Exactly what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the value proposition that we will be offering? Pinpoint precisely the benefits of the value, not the list of features that will be in the PRD. And differentiation makes us unique. Why should they choose us over all the other options or whatever they're doing right now? And then number 5, what are the things we don't know? Because we don't know a lot of things, so we should be writing those down now as risks and assumptions, because if I don't do that, I'm stating something with more clarity and certainty than I really have. So I find if you just boil down these big sort of requirements documents and things that often you're asked to fill in, to instead writing effectively a 1-pager framework, and there's some examples on my website, and there's tons of examples out there, and answering at least those 5 questions. And there are a couple of others that you can then go into. You stay in problem space longer. You don't get into solution mode too quickly. And you really hold yourself accountable to, do I really understand the problem and why we're doing this? And it leads naturally to starting to define the outcomes that you seek and the metrics that you want to measure, as opposed to, here's the laundry list of features I want. So that's one framework, very simple. But even if your company requires you to build out these big specification docs or write all day in Jira about all of the, the use cases and acceptance criteria, which is very important for delivery, you take a step back and really be sure you understand the problem you're trying to solve first, and use that to test with your internal folks. And I'll mention just 2 other quick ones. I'm asked all the time about prioritization. It's the number one challenge that product managers face. It's also by a number of different studies. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to attribute the study I was reading the other day. I'd have to look that up, but I think it's called The State of Product Management. Time and time again, the number one skill gap that the companies say that their product managers have is prioritization.
Well,
product managers are frustrated. Companies are frustrated about prioritization. I talk about it in a chapter in the book. There is a way to move through this in a simple way. it's not going to be for everyone. And I certainly wouldn't want to prioritize like a really high risk, complex project around it. But I have found that using a very simple prioritization framework, 2 steps. The first is you agree on the criteria that you're going to prioritize with first. And you spend your time with your stakeholders really clarifying those and their relative weightings, if you will, and making sure that everyone understands these are the things that we've chosen to optimize for. I don't talk about all the features you want. I don't talk about all the projects that are on my roadmap.
Just the formula we all be respecting.
Exactly. Well, you can actually turn that into a scorecard. Scorecards have their weaknesses. They're easy to gain. If you're not careful, people like start putting all sorts of numbers there. But if you think in that term, my first step is to really be crystal clear about what actually constitutes the criteria for prioritization first. Because if I can't get alignment among my stakeholders there, I don't have a chance what happens next. And I do often find that it's not simple. It's not like, oh, just get this number from this to this. Like some product management roles, like I had a growth PM who were able to simplify his criteria pretty much based on you're going to drive the conversion rate up. But even then it got really messy because there's always externalities and things he can't control and downstream effects and things. But rarely it's that simple. So you might find that you've got a couple of different key themes, if you will, or criteria that you now need to prioritize with. Once you have those agreed and their relative importance, then you can now lay out the different projects and
ideas and everything you want to put on the roadmap.
Exactly. And the most amazing thing tends to happen. First of all, there's rarely major disagreement about what's right at the top. And there's rarely major disagreement about what's right at the bottom. And what happens in the mushy middle is actually a difference of opinion about what's going to drive which criteria more. And that is your clue to building your discovery roadmap. Top is your delivery roadmap. No one's disagreeing. We should get on with it. Stop debating it. Let's get going. You've got enough confidence that that's okay. We're going to be wrong still. That's okay. We're going to move forward, right? Back to decision making. But your mushy middle where it's like, I don't know, this stakeholder just keeps on insisting that is going to be like the thing that's going to nail customer retention in this year. And I just don't have the evidence. Well, go get the evidence. And that's how you sort of build confidence.
The discovery roadmap that probably still needs
exactly.
some more data points to figure out on the next round of prioritization.
Exactly. The brilliant thing about this is the conversations matter. Prioritization becomes just sort of like a bit of a process, a bit of a thing that happens. Your framework is super simple. Keep it simple. I really recommend, even in a complex role, I found that even a simple scorecard usually works just fine because it's the conversations that matter, because you're driving alignment or surfacing disagreement around the criteria first, and then which things are actually going to affect what criteria and why do you believe that? And then now you can drill into the things that are really going to matter, and you don't have to have answers to everything now, because 2 to 3 things on the biggest disagreements are going to be the things that you got to go learn in the next quarter or two. They're going to change either you're wrong, priority goes up, or you've been able to demonstrate that it doesn't make sense. Now, not perfect, but that framework rarely fails me.
That's super insightful nugget you just shared for anyone who is a business owner or senior leadership roles on the strategic tables. Spend some time working out what we want to optimize for, what is the criteria for success, and only later very roadmap based on the formula. Now everyone agrees. I love that. That's a very insightful.
And be clear, it has its problems because often you've still got poor data or unclear metrics, or it's still like a little bit of a wild guess.
It's not a silver bullet,
right?
But it brings a lot of common understandings.
It informs the conversations and really focuses the conversations on the things that really will matter. Where are we in agreement, and where are we in disagreement, and what do we need to really go and learn? That's why that's useful, not because your scorecard's right or your priorities are right, and that's going to be the perfect strategy to solve
That will
customers'
change all the
problems.
problems in the world. Yeah. I do get that, and that's super lovely. I feel I could spend 3 more hours talking with you, but I'm conscious that you are in Melbourne, in the other side of the world. So I have
That's
a few
okay.
quick fire questions,
Yeah.
and I want people to get some advice from you on their careers. So I will just end up with some couple questions on quickfire, which is for audience of junior PMs now aspiring to grow in their roles. What skills, maybe influence, maybe others, or habits should they focus on developing for junior PMs?
Yeah. Well, let me be clear. Like, influence is a collective like lens on all of the skills that you have built, and it ultimately comes down
Kind
to
of psychological trait you need to bring with you, or mindset.
It's actually ultimately about what other people think,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you go and deliver something, that translates into influence when others say, I recognize you've delivered that. I trust you can deliver that again, and that you have the right motivations behind that, right? So, and that you know what you're doing. So that's when influence starts kicking in. So I don't actually recommend junior PMs to try to focus purely on influence, because they're going to mess it up. They're going to turn it into politics, or they're going to try to influence and talk a big game, but they've really not got the wherewithal in their history to back
Or the
it up.
history the track history to prove. Okay,
Right.
got it.
So I'd be very cautious at frame this in the right way. A good habit, discipline to get in training as a junior PM is the discipline over your own time. So much comes at you as a product manager, and so much feels out of control that your calendar can just be blown out. How do you actually, even if it's not every single day, how do you ensure that over, say, a quarter, you're moving forward different goals, one about your product, you're moving the product forward. I hear a lot of people saying they're delivering a lot, they're doing a lot around that product, but when you look at what are you actually doing in terms of moving that product's outcomes from A to B, there's not a lot there. So get into the discipline of really thinking the long goal on product. How am I moving towards those outcomes? And am I really moving, am I using my time in a disciplined way to focus on driving those outcomes? Secondly, am I spending time on things that am I developing personally? So what's my personal goal? What skill do I need to really try to invest in? One of the most common is presentation skills. Another very common one is actually going and talking to customers and interviewing them and getting used to doing that. And a third one is just starting to think ahead, like starting to kind of do a little bit of rudimentary strategic planning and analytics, looking at my metrics. So what do I need to develop just because it's an important skill? Even though I might not have that as something I need to do every single day. And then the third thing I would look at is what can I point to that's contributing to the success of the business? And that could be, for a junior person, it can be at the level of how am I helping my team and my manager be successful? Maybe I'm doing something to help others. Maybe I've got a special project that I can take on, or maybe I'm helping us sort out some of our tooling. So if you kind of can think of those three levels, what am I doing around my product? What am I doing around my professional development? And what am I doing to contribute to the team and the business? And having something, I'm disciplined enough to think about, I've got my time, it keeps on going up and down and randomized, but I'm actually moving those three things forward, then that would be an amazing habit to get into, like writing those things down, being cognizant of it, reflecting, say weekly or so, am I moving these forward, and figuring out how to find the time to
despite all the chaos, find the focus to keep thinking about these three things you mentioned along the way and see if there's progress.
Exactly.
Really
and I'm going to mention one more that I think is super important, that I'm hearing this a lot more, and that is product managers used to be, are you technical? Can you work with engineers? Can you build things? Can you ship things? All very important, by the way. All very, very important. And that's not going to ever go away. In fact, I think at one point in my book, I say when in doubt, ship, right? If you're really struggling, when in doubt, ship. But I'm hearing a lot more about the importance of just basic business acumen as a skill set. And that kind of touches on prioritization, touches on analytics. So you can kind of combine those a little bit. But just basically being able to talk the language of a P&L, being able to be understanding the product that you own's unit economics, being able to speak to, hey, I've got a team and we're spending like $1 million a year on this team, probably more in many countries. At what is the business getting for that investment? And just not taking it for granted that the money's just going to show up and the resources will just keep on showing up. Being able to really think like, this is a business. How are we creating like a sustainable business that I would want to invest in? And how to then like turn that understanding into speaking to others who aren't product managers or on the technical side, but on the business side, sort of in their language, and being able to like converse around the fundamentals of the business that we have and where we want it to be and where it's not and what we're going to do to sort of get there. I find that's incredible. Like when a product manager can do that, they earn trust a lot very, very quickly because they're showing that they kind of understand that.
And they care about the business, not only shipping their pretty product.
Totally.
It's not only the product by itself. Yeah.
Totally. And they show they're accountable and they, that they're trying to be good stewards of where the company's investing. So that comes in many flavors. But think business acumen. I think that's a huge differentiator if you want to stand out as a junior.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in, even for junior positions. But they should be aware of it. They should be aware. That's just how it goes. That's just how this profession goes.
I'm astounded. I mean, I'm not judgmental because I don't think they've had the opportunity, but I'm astounded how often I'm talking to someone I'm coaching and I ask them the unit economics or what they think their investment in the product has been and what the return on that investment is. Terms that they kind of vaguely get, but to really actually understand it. Now, I'm not saying you have to live and die by it and say, we're going to manage every single priority by ROI. I'm not saying that.
No, but be conscious of it, being understandful that this needs to create an impact for the business, for the users, or other. And the order that you suggested, I much follow users, 100%. Business, teams, and our own professionals being developing. That's just the way it goes. And any advice for senior PMs? As a senior PM, we often face challenges in transitioning in these leadership roles. So what advice do you have for them as they move from more execution towards strategy?
Okay. The first piece of advice is, and I'm going to try to say this and hopefully it lands. In the early part of your role, you get where you get because of what you're doing and your capabilities and your skills and being able to get things done. In later levels, particularly kicking in a director, you're not there because of what you do. You're carried there by other people. They want you in that role. They trust you. They know you've not actually done strategy yet, but they want you in that role. They'll carry you into that role because of everything you've done. So if you think about this split, you get a lot of senior product managers hit a wall at director saying, why can't I get promoted? And it's because they don't understand that. They're so busy focusing on what they're doing, what their delivery is, like what their priorities are, what it is that they've gone and done for the business. They've often done a fairly good job of self-promotion internally, but they've forgotten that actually they need the trust of the marketing team, the business development team, the content development team, not just the engineering team, but they need, the DevOps team to say, like they get our role, like the empathy.
And I love it because one may stumble in product management, but often gets pushed into director. It needs other people pushing you.
That's right. So understand that your transition into this level is not by you suddenly going and being really great at strategy. Oh, I was great at execution. Now I'm really good at strategy. It's actually a little bit more along the lines of I have executed very well. I had shown my ability to not only deliver product, but actually be accountable to that driving results. And I can speak to those results. Not all of them are great, but people can see that I'm looking at the results. So what if a few things didn't work out? And now I'm ready to be invited into those more senior roles, not because suddenly I'm good at strategy or I should be
But I'm
given
reliable, I'm trustworthy, I have my guidance, and yeah.
It's right.
Okay, loves it.
So you've got to think about, how am I building a very positive working relationships, reputation without it being self-promoting. And ultimately people want to say, you've not done strategy before, but we trust that you'll be able to figure it out because we can see what you've done so far. That's kind of the way I think people get into that role rather than suddenly developing a new skill and just, here I am. Now I've
a new
gone in. I've gone, exactly.
Yeah, amazing. That was a lovely conversation, Ken. I want to, before we go, I want to see how do you see this role evolving, because you started very early on when there was no product management courses out there. Now you even have one. So how do you see the role of product management in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I'm positive, and I might just be an optimist here. Maybe there's a bit of confirmation bias going on in my head, and that's, should be aware of that. But on the positive, I'm not seeing the roles going away. I think that there's tons of value in having someone who can deeply focus on even a small customer problem at a level that can then translate into solving that in an elegant and business sustainable way. There's that role, that the level of problem solving, collaboration, all that good stuff is, I don't think, going away. I sense that the role is going to go through some disruptions, but I think it's more of an evolution, continuing to go down the path that we're already on. One that emphasizes less and less on the technical skills or the tools or being able to come up with big, grand product plans, and more on what people that can form a hypothesis, figure out how to learn, but at the same time, take good bets on things that are a little out of the box, a little innovative, ready sometimes to make a jump when the data is not always there because you believe it's the right thing for the customer, or you think that there's a potential delighting factor here. Like, I think that we're just going to continue to emphasize a lot of those fundamentals and move less and less away. What will go away more and more is the tasks that are gobbling up a lot of our time that are less valuable, in my opinion. Things such as project managing the team, or defining every single requirement, right up to more and more of our even discovery is going to be automated for us, which is great. Like being able to quickly learn. We're still going to need to, we don't get the empathy that way. So we're still going to need to talk to our customers, but our ability to be able to learn through all the different tools that are coming more quickly online, it's already been happening. And I think it's just going to accelerate more. Tools are getting stronger. Our ability to collaborate, build roadmaps, some of those things are actually going to fall away, be less important. Already some of my larger clients that used to emphasize like year-long planning, they're already talking about like this more incremental quarterly planning where we're just constantly updating with new information. I think more of that will happen and continue to happen, but we still need people who can have a vision, understand a customer, be able to translate that set of problems into something meaningful to the organization that overlaps with value for the business, that can then turn into opportunities that team can then build solutions for, and those solutions can then go into market and someone can actually nurse them through what the market into successful state. Managing their life cycle, I just don't see that just going away.
It's such a big pipeline of things from start to the end. That's probably some tasks can be automated, but the role itself is still necessary.
Some product managers are in trouble. Product managers who are in trouble are those that see their role as taking a list of priorities from inside the business, breaking them down, prioritizing them, and then trying to drive some kind of implementation plan and kind of finishing when something is launched. They're the ones who will be automated away.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's coming in the product management.
Well, move to the bookends,
Mhm.
right? So more time spent in the problem space, understanding the customer, understanding. Yeah, we've heard all that from me like
Mhm.
a million times right now. But move upstream, but also move downstream. There are lots of
Less
products
of the
in market.
less of the tactical things on the daily things, but work on the really problems we're
Well,
trying to solve.
less of thinking about the next feature I'm going to launch,
Mhm.
really making sure that the experience is actually solving the problem. And how do I optimize it? And am I really measuring it? Where we have massive gaps still are still on people who, and this is definitely for junior product managers, want a place to start. Look after a product has been launched and really understand, is this solving the problem? What are the metrics that show that we're solving the problem? Where does it need to be fixed? Where does it need to be improved? They're the areas that I think will not disappear. Anyone can build something very quickly these days. That wasn't the case when I started, by the way.
Mhm.
So the roles changed, but moving more and more downstream and upstream to thinking about like really making sure that the measuring the product and measuring the success of the product in market and figuring out what to do about it is super valuable. So much stuff just gets launched and just left out there and not really evolved, and no one really knows, did this actually solve a problem?
Mhm.
You might have solved it, but did it get used, and did it actually, successfully do what you promised it would? So many folks can't answer that problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, something for the audience to think about. Ken, it's been a massive pleasure having you on the podcast. Where can people
Welcome.
find you? Find you about yourself, follow you, find your book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a big user of LinkedIn, so feel free to connect to
Mhm.
me on LinkedIn. I might take a little bit of time to reply, but if you say you heard me on this podcast, I will certainly accept your invitation. Then you can kind of keep track of me and look at my network and do whatever else you want to do. So linkedin.com/in/Ken Sandy. You can also visit my website. I have to admit, it's not my proudest work and it needs a little bit of work, but it does the trick. Influentialpm.com. And there you can find some more details from the book, as well as some resources that you might be able to use, including even the scorecard I was talking about before. But if you
Mhm.
don't find something that you heard about today, or you would like some advice, please don't hesitate to reach out through LinkedIn. Once you give me a little bit of time to reply, I will certainly reach out and help you if I can. And so don't hesitate to connect to me on that. And then finally, please do visit your favorite online bookstore and pick up a copy of The Influential Product Manager. I'm very proud of the work there, and it really does talk a lot about how to demystify this term influence.
Yeah, and I totally second it. I think it's something that people should definitely get. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to have you back in the future. Don't
Thank you so
forget,
much.
thank you. Don't forget to also follow
Bye.
Productized on LinkedIn and subscribe to the podcast to keep with more great conversation like this. See you next time.